Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Yael, would you tell me 3 minutes before my time is up? Thank you. So, I think that, I personally think that we should give up a project of common, unified understanding. And I personally like variety. I like pluralism. I think it's okay that there are different schools and different orientations and different images of suffering and how to help suffering people. And I also like purists. I'm not a purist myself. I'm totally not a purist, but after I didn't like purists and I got into their heads, now I like purists. I understand them. I understand them better.
You still say it's them.
Yes, it's not me. I'm not a purist, but I do think there should be more communication between people who do not agree to each other and between different schools. And for that to happen, one should respect the other's differences. And this is what I want to talk to you here, because a subject that is raised up again and again is the thing with empirical research. And I want to talk about something that I think should be given thought and more respected, and read something from my book. The question I asked in my book, one of the questions is, how can rational people, the psychoanalysts, how can rational people, devotees of Western culture, with an education based on the scientific ethos, be fascinated by a theory with virtually none of its assumption proven in a laboratory, and that is struggling to corroborate the efficacy of its therapy? Can the fact that they show so little interest in scientific research be logically explained? What disturbs professional practitioners in the academic psychology? Why are the academic psychologists so disturbed by that? And so what I want to bring here is the notion of images of knowledge. Images of knowledge is a term by philosopher of science Yehuda Elkanah. Images of knowledge are socially determined views about knowledge, as opposed to views about nature or about society. These are ideas that touch on questions such as, what is the objective of science? Predictions or understanding, for example. What is truth? Is it a certainty? Is it a probability? Or is it something that is objectively unattainable? What are the sources of knowledge? A very important question. Are there its sensory perceptions? Are there observations, empirical research, deduction, intuition? Images of knowledge are dependent upon periods of time, culture, and society. They determine what is considered important, interesting, ridiculous, absurd, harmonious, symmetrical, beautiful, or of value in a scientific theory. There are images of knowledge held by the general public and images of knowledge characteristic of a particular scientific community. Some images of knowledge remain intact, for hundreds of years, and some endure for decades, while the acceptance of still others lasts for just a few years. And what I want to say is that scientific communities differ in their images of knowledge, in the way they see what is knowledge and what is truth. Sources of knowledge is a very important thing, because this is where academic psychology differs from psychoanalytic communities. These are sources upon which a particular field of research is based. The legitimate sources of knowledge are not decided upon by the theory itself. Rather, such sources are determined by the images of knowledge. And even within the same body of knowledge, there are occasionally a number of parallel sub-communities that may hold differing or contradictory images of knowledge. We can see it in the psychoanalytic movement itself, there different communities hold different images of knowledge and appreciate different sources of knowledge. So the ranking of the possible areas of research in their order of importance is also decided by socially determined criteria. Yes, the images of knowledge are socially determined. Sources of knowledge are hierarchically organized, and they range from those that have gained the broadest level of acceptance within a large community to sources associated with smaller and more marginal communities. Okay, so I'm going to skip a lot of this and say that the Elkanah theory helps us to understand the contemporary crisis in psychoanalysis, that it's not verified from a new perspective. And the crisis is an outcome of a gap between the images of knowledge held by two widely different communities, the psychoanalytic community, or at least a substantial majority of it, and the broad scientific community, especially academic psychology, because these communities have such opposing views as to what constitute a legitimate source of knowledge. They have difficulty in accepting each other and tend to ignore or be hostile to one another. Again, I'm going to skip here. Yes. People who have entirely contradictory images of knowledge are simply unable to conduct a productive debate and instead engage in what effectively is a dialogue of the deaf. Their discourse will be somewhat like a conversation about the creation of the universe between a religious man and a scientist, or between supporters and opponents of abortion. There is no convincing argument that can change the mind of those who believe that case studies provide a sufficient foundation of knowledge on which psychoanalytic writings are based. And ultimately, the argument often looks like this. The analyst, the scientific person says, I have difficulty believing that every child between the ages of 4 and 5 go through an Oedipal period. After all, there is no proof of this to be found in scientifically conducted empirical research studies. And the analyst answered him, of course every child goes through such a phase. Even now I can point to a wealth of clinical material stemming from the analysis of just 3 patients in my clinic whose case the Oedipus complex was an important element. And the scientific person said, that's not enough for me to believe in or to take it seriously. For me to do so requires a great deal more than the anecdotal evidence from your experience you have had with your own patients. Aren't you troubled by the fact that no scientific experiment has been conducted to prove the truth of this phenomenon? And the analyst tells him, not at all. This is not the sort of clinical phenomena that can be validated in the laboratory. I have witnessed the phenomenon in my clinic and read dozens of articles about it in my professional literature. Did you not read Freud and the numerous examples showing that the Oedipus complex has an impact on all human society? And this goes on and on and on, and you can see that neither of them can convince each other. So, and then occasionally, a community or an individual may find itself embracing contradictory images of knowledge. I think that part of psychodynamic psychotherapists who work in the academic really have this contradiction between their community, psychoanalytic community, and their scientific colleagues. And this leads to a kind of a tension within the community or the individual. Eric Kandel, the American neuropsychiatrist and the recipient of the 2000 Nobel Prize for his research on physiological basis of memory storage in neurons, is an interesting example of a scholar who was confronted by precisely such a dilemma. Initially, Kandel was fascinated by psychoanalysis, but eventually was so disturbed by its scientific shortcomings that he abandoned it as his profession in favor of brain research. Recently, Kandel was asked by a journalist why he had wanted to become an analyst at the beginning of his career, and he said, "In part, I was drawn to psychoanalysis because it promised so much. In the 1950s and early 60s, psychoanalysis swept through the intellectual community, and it was the dominant mode of thinking about the mind. People felt that this was a completely new set of insights into human motivation and that its therapeutic potential was significant. It was seen as the treatment that solved everything in the world, from schizophrenia to ingrown toenails." It's amazing how it was oversold. When this turned out to be more hope than reality, things flipped in the other directions. In my case, I didn't pursue it because I fell in love with research. So fortunately for psychoanalysis, there are many therapists who, although are troubled by the absence of scientific basis for the discipline theory, did not bow out and instead became attached to the scientifically, which I call scientifically troubled communities. Some of them endeavor to advance psychoanalytic writings in their laboratories, while others try to find a way of demonstrating the efficacy of the discipline therapeutic methods on the basis of their effect on a sample number of patients. So I think this community, supporters of empirical research within the psychoanalytic scientific world, usually occupy positions at the university research center, and their origin are in the non-psychoanalytic world of research. Membership at the university institute is of great significance in relation to the images of knowledge held by community members. A member of scientifically oriented research department accepts the images of knowledge held by their colleagues. Yes, Sigolan, for example, and many others. For whom external testing is the highest importance in the validation of a theory. And so they are also working along analysts, and so for the most part, some of them will attempt to resolve the clash of images through psychoanalytic empirical research, and I think they're living in a divided world where they have the psychoanalytic community who was indifferent to their research, but they have these scientists working with them who appreciate research, and they have really they have no comfort zone, I think, no comfortable home to be in because they belong to two different homes. I personally think Golan is has much more affinity to the research scientists than to mainstream psychoanalysis, and we can see it in how we move from home to home and from one place to another because nothing sits well there. So my concluding remark is that I think if we accept the fact that people have different images of knowledge, different kind of truth, and that images of knowledge also as scientific, it's not something objective, but it's something socially driven, and we can respect these differences, I think it will lead to more openness to each other and more conductive dialogue between the different schools. Thank you.